Kathy, you've, as I said in the introduction, cared for your father who died in a residential facility. Your mother died in hospital, and your husband, died at home. Can you tell us the story of how that death, your husband's death, made you think that you wanted to become a mentor, having been a carer?
Yeah, it was actually more a combination of the trifecta. I didn't set out to personally experience every conceivable type of death, as it were, but life decided otherwise. My mother died in intensive care in the UK. I flew over and was with her for the last 4 days, 2 of which she was absolutely unconscious. Should she have been alive for those 4 days? No. Basically, the care they were giving her was totally unnecessary, ineffective and inappropriate. The family were not able to be there with her most of the time, and we were actually pushed out of the ICU unit for half an hour because the nurse decided that it was time that we should not be there. We were with her at her death, but there was no comfort in it for any of us because of the nature of it. My father lived for 2 years in the UK and lived with a brother of mine and my sister, and decided that he would come over to live with me because he knew that he had a recurrence of his cancer, and the recurrence of the cancer for him was basically an end-of-life situation. So when we tried to get him citizenship or permission to stay, he had to be seen by a consultant geriatrician, and he didn't pass the tick test. He passed the Christmas tree test because his scan was lit up like a Christmas tree. He had cancer in so many places that it just wasn't possible. So we sat down and talked about his death on that first day, and we discussed exactly what he wanted and set about arranging for that to be the case. And we didn't need to discuss it after that. He wanted to be flown home and buried in the UK with my mum, and I didn't tell him that that meant he had to be embalmed because I thought he might not like that. You know, there's a need-to-know basis with these things. But he was seriously ill. He had morphine toxicity. He'd had prostate cancer before the bone cancer, and consequently his kidneys weren't getting rid of the morphine that we were being told to give him and were happily pushing in, you know, and he was happily storing it and getting really quite high. And at the same time, my husband was taken into hospital after having been diagnosed with bowel cancer, and his bowel cancer was fairly advanced, but they thought they'd caught it soon enough. So I have the one day when my husband's having surgery, my father's being admitted through emergency, 2 hospitals on the one site, one private, one public, and the sudden realisation that my life's changed massively. I spent 3 weeks going between the 2 hospitals, spending anything up to 20 hours a day, just trying to be there. And the specialists get to know you because they come earlier and earlier so that you won't get there early enough to see them. But they hadn't actually met me, so I just kept going in earlier. So it came to a critical situation where I was told by a social worker where my father was in the hospital he was in that I would not be allowed to take my dad home. He would have to go into a nursing home. And that was given as fact. No information about any support that might be available to me. No information about any extra care that, you know, no other options at all. That was it. He's going. What am I going to do? My mum's dead. My dad is now going in a nursing home. This is real heartbreaking stuff. It's the sort of stuff that you don't wish on your worst enemy. Mm-mm. But at the same time, I had my husband who was not recovering from his surgery. So I sat my dad down to sort of say, you know, sorry about this, Dad, but I'm not going to be able to take you home. And his response was, you've got to take care of your husband. He was an absolute trooper. He just took it on the chin and was absolutely magic. And Brett came home eventually. He had 2 years of having chemo treatment and then going into remission. My father died 2 months after my husband came home, so my husband never got to see him again because he wasn't well enough to go to the nursing home. And I was on points of going out to work on the one day and just rang the nursing home because I'd been worried over the weekend. I'd been in and out to see my dad. And call it sixth sense or whatever, I rang and just said, "Oh, how's my dad going? Is he okay?" "Oh yeah, he's fine." 10 seconds later, I get the phone call back saying, "Actually, he's not fine. His breathing's gone really quite peculiar. Can you come in?" So myself and one of my daughters managed to get there to be with him in time for him to die. And the other daughters didn't actually manage to be there. So the care and support he was having, whilst was good in a fashion, was not good enough to allow us the opportunity to be there with him or to have him with us, which is more to the point. When it came to be my husband's turn to die, he actually developed lung cancer after the bowel cancer. He was a trailblazer because that's not how it works. You get liver cancer when you've had bowel cancer, but we never did the liver cancer thing. Again, he had treatment for that. He had too many tumours to actually have surgery. So he had the chemo, and again, we thought everything was going well. And then he developed brain tumours. Again, it's not supposed to happen, so anybody that knows anybody with bowel cancer, rest assured this is not the path that's normally taken. The difference with my husband was that he did have the opportunity to stay at home. And the reason for that was that when he finally had to accept, and I say had to accept because he was in total denial. He was going to beat it. He was going to be the man who really was a Joel. He was going to, knock this on the head. And unfortunately that wasn't possible for him. And he had very extreme procedures done to try and help prolong his life. But when it came to actually talking about his end of life, the one thing that he actually wanted was a promise from me that no matter what happened, he would be allowed to die at home and with dignity. That turned out to be a bigger ask than I'd actually realised at the time, as these things do. I had a very good GP. I had an excellent palliative care team working at the local hospital, and they were great. I had 3 daughters, one in the UK, one who was living with me, and another one who wasn't. And I had a mother-in-law who came and stayed periodically. What I didn't have was any knowledge of any other support that was available to me. We didn't have a case manager. We were never offered support in the home. It was taken that, we could actually cope with that as a mother and a daughter-in-law, and bearing in mind that my mother-in-law had actually lost her husband to cancer. He'd died from cancer about 6 months prior. It was really hard to have to look at talking to these people. You don't share your emotions with those that you love. It's much easier to talk to someone you don't know. And that's what got me into the mentoring, because I wanted to have a situation where nobody ever had, through lack of knowledge, to have a father die in a nursing home or have a loved one that had to go into hospital because they didn't know you could stay at home. Because there are pressures put on you. I was ill, and that was why it was particularly difficult for me at that time. I was physically unwell, had neck surgery, what have you. And the pressure was put on because people thought they knew better than me what was best for me and what was best for my husband. We were married for nearly 35 years. You don't actually give up the love and the responsibility that goes with that because you've got a bad neck. Yeah.
Can I just come to you, Joel, on the back of what Kathy's just said and ask you, I'm absolutely staggered by what you've just said about, no support, no care, no case manager, nobody, the assumption being that you and your family could could do that by yourself. So Joel, what's the most commonly asked question on the Life Goes On telephone helpline? What do people want to know most?
What do I do?
But can you be more specific about that kind of what'll I do question? Are they, to go back to, is it a bodily fluids question? Is it a question about fear? Is it a question about, I don't know if I'm hurting them, I don't know how to manage their pain? I mean, what are the specifics that people really want to know about?
It's a bit of all of them. I mean, just as you asked the question, one of the classic calls we had was from a woman who phoned up. She was absolutely desperate. She says, my father's just thrown all these pills and flushed them down the toilet. What do I do? Somebody else phones up and says, the doctor says there's nothing more they can do for me. Who do I talk to? I don't want to die. Somebody else phones up and says, I'm in incredible pain. What the doctor's given me is not working. I'm just beside myself. A lot of the people who call are on their own with no support. We were quite surprised as we track the calls that we get. We found that the times when, we thought that people would call us in the middle of the night. They rarely do. They're very polite. They call during the day because they sort of appreciate that you hopefully just working business hours. But one thing that struck us, which was very, very interesting, which was that those families that had really good support and tended to be ethnically based didn't really call us. It's the Western bunch, us Caucasian.
You mean the stiff upper lip bunch?
Stiff upper lip, yes. Yeah, we manage better than anybody else, don't we? Christmas time is a difficult time for a lot of people when they're on their own. So kind of, I guess, when that spiritual pain and the emotional pain is unrelieved by the hand or somebody in proximity, we often get calls from people from care facilities phoning us because there's nobody around them. Oh, they're off duty or they've gone for a tea break, which is challenging.
In your experience of this world, and you, Kathy, might also want to say something about this. Ideally, for the burden of care to fall on one person is very heavy. Is there an ideal number of people that it's 2 or 3 of you that need to kind of do this in relay? You cannot be expected to do this by yourself. So you need a couple of family members, you need a support team behind you of friends, people who are going to deliver the meals, people who are going to do the school run, whatever it is. Do you have a kind of a formula of how that works best?
The answer to that is no. I mean, I've been mentoring now for 2 years, and there's no one size fits all. There's no one family situation, and people do manage on their own, but with the support from the services or with the community if we're able to get them involved. It really is a matter of the emotional support that they get from the mentoring as well, because that's telephone mentoring in a lot of cases for us too.
But do you find that in some cases family and friends will actively attempt to discourage people from doing this? They'll say, look, this is going to be too much for you, don't do it. So absolutely.
But what they're not doing is listening to the carer's needs and the carer's voice. And that is something that is overlooked in so many cases. And that's where we start. That's our first question, what can we do for you? Because it is about what supports they need. Some people are quite happy to do the vacuuming. They've always done it. That's relaxation. Others need home care. So it really is as simple as asking that first question, and that opens the door.
Helen, I wanted to come back to you and ask you what you think you learned about yourself through the experience of caring for your sister. Because I think that sometimes people are astonished to discover they may have always thought, for example, that they were an impatient person, that they find reserves of patience in this sort of situation that they didn't know that they had, or they find reserves of resilience, compassion, all sorts of things. So for you, what did you learn?
Well, I probably learnt in that regard less from being with my sister than I did from being with my friend. Because, see, I actually think of myself as being kind of competent, you know. I think, when she said, can I come and stay for 3 weeks while I do this, blah, 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 I said, sure, yeah, of course you can. And I felt really pleased. I thought, I am going to really rock at this. I am going to have, the sheets will be lovely, and I'll make these little sensitive snacks and everything vegetarian. She was a vegetarian. And I thought, I'm going to really be good at this. And I had this a feeling of vanity about my own competence. And the chocks were kicked out from under that in about 10 minutes. I learnt that I can't survive sleep deprivation. I think that's one of the worst and most terrible things in life, is not getting enough sleep and having to go on. I learnt that I was a bully, that I had the potential to bully someone. I also found in myself a kind of something that I liked more, which was the ability to be with somebody quietly and not talk all the time and think that I had to be entertaining. I just found in myself an ability to be a companion for someone, I suppose. And that was taught to me by the situation, and I'm grateful for that now.
And did you know where to go for information if and when you needed it? I mean, if you had needed some sort of backup, some sort of expertise, did you know how to go and get that?
Well, with my sister, yes, because she was such a well-organised person and she'd foreseen a lot of matters and had got herself sorted out. But with my friend, the word palliative was like, when she said the word palliative, it said DEAD. And she would not even contemplate I said, but look, what if we need someone in the middle of the night? No, what if you're in pain? No, we won't. And she was completely doggedly against it, and I didn't know how to deal with that, and I still don't know.
And in your sister's case, being so organised, does that mean, for example, that she had an advanced care directive, that you had the sort of paperwork, you had the kind of plans laid out?
I never saw such a document, but knowing my sister, there would have been one with all the seals and stamps. Yeah, but we were in contact with the people at Caritas Christi, and they were just beyond fabulous. So I can't speak highly enough of them. So I never. And also, she had a couple of friends. She had one woman friend who used to come in quietly, whose husband had died, and who looked after her husband at home. Very quiet, thoughtful person. And one day, my sisters and I were busily drawing up a roster for the following week. And this woman, Claire was her name, she came in. And she said, what are you doing? I said, we're drawing up the roster for this week. And she went in and saw my sister, and then she came out and said, girls, you're not going to need a roster for this week. And she was right. You know, my sister died about 2 days later. But so we didn't know, none of us had any experience of seeing the sort of stages of approaching death, which I think, was it you that was on the radio the other day?
Yes.
Yeah, and you talked about that, I think, about there's a bit of paper that says, you know, these are the signs of approaching death, and of course you don't know what they are if you haven't been with a dying person before. And so I, listening to you on the radio, I thought, what a fantastically useful thing that would be to have.
I want to pick up on this issue about care. I think there are a lot of people who don't ask for care because they feel, A, they don't deserve it.
Yes.
Or B, because they feel that why would they want to burden somebody else with their problem? And that becomes a challenge.
It does.
I remember my late father, who I cared for the last years of his life. I bought him one of those monitors that you put around your neck in case he collapsed and would press it. And one day I found this thing in his drawer. And I said, well, you know, there's no use there. And he said, you know, I'll never use it. So,
it's classic.
Well, my father
maybe that's where I inherited that thing from, you know.
Oh, I was just reminding me of when my father, I went in to see him. He lived next door to me. I used to go in there every morning and we'd go out to have a coffee. And I went in there this morning and he was putting his sandals on. And he said, I came over a bit funny in the shower this morning. And I had a look at him and I thought, I think we might go to the doctor. And then I had another look and I said, I think we'll call an ambulance. We call the ambulance comes around and these two paramedics come in and they say, now, Mr. Ford, have you had any trouble with your heart? And he goes, there's nothing wrong with my heart. And I'm going, he's got congestive cardiac failure. And they go, no, there's nothing wrong with my heart, as they trundle him out the door. And he basically sort of half died in the ambulance on the way to hospital. But, you know, that was, I just loved my father for being that pig-headed. I mean, in retrospect, I loved him for being that pig-headed. But, you know, so they took him to the hospital. But he was convinced there was nothing wrong with him. But he never regained consciousness.
But that is also, I think, a generational thing.
Yeah.
That generation has been absolutely stoically determined to say, I do not want anyone to make a fuss.
Yes.
And I think we're going to be different. We're going to say, make a fuss.
Yeah.
I think we are.
But that's true. That I thought when you were saying about, you know, when I said that my niece wept and wailed very loudly, and you said what you said about the loud signs of lamentation, which is that beautiful word you used. That's my generation. We had the stiff upper lip. One did not weep and wail. One wept in silence, if one wept at all. But those generational changes are really quite extreme.
We need to bring it back.
Yeah,
I can feel the room, you know, bristling with excitement at the idea of talking to you and asking you some questions. So I'm going to open it to the floor in a moment. But before I do, I just want to finish by asking each of you something that's really struck me during the day through all the conversations that we've had. That the phrase "dying with dignity" is the phrase that keeps coming up, that people keep using. That everybody's wish is to die with dignity, wherever it is. And I just wanted to ask each of you what that phrase means to you.
For me, dying with dignity is dying in a peaceful, natural way. And that doesn't mean that you don't necessarily have pipes and tubes if you need them. It means dying with the people that you love around you, supporting you, and being able to be with you as and when they choose. And I can't think of a better way to go. So that's what it is for me.
John?
It's a very philosophical question, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that, what do you think you're worth? I mean, isn't that the question about dying with dignity? What do you think you're worth?
What do you mean?
I don't.
Well, do you deserve to die in a perfect situation? I mean, I don't know that one can necessarily answer that question in a general sense. I think it's also got a lot to do with perception. I don't want to be seen with tubes coming out of me and all the rest of it. I want to go down in that idyllic situation as portrayed in Hollywood. You know, I'm lying back on my bed surrounded by my family, and I bless everybody in turn, and I say thank you for a wonderful life, and I die.
Yeah. I think that is absolutely what we think dying with dignity might be, but obviously it's a lot of other things.
And it also has to do with location. I think, you know, this whole idea that I'm going to be in my bed doesn't happen. As Sharon was talking about this morning, the reality of life is that it isn't like that always.
No. People die in bathrooms.
On the toilet.
Sure. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
They die in the desert of no food.
So, Helen, what does that phrase "dying"? Does it have any meaning for you? That phrase "dying with dignity"?
Well, I thought it did until these two spoke, and now I think. I'll tell you what. I tell you what I thought while you were talking. I was frantically trying to think how I would like to die, and I had this vision of myself heroically dying, taking a bullet for one of my grandchildren. No, I thought, yeah, I would die. I would die for them. I would cheerfully die, not just with dignity, but I would throw myself in front of the gun, or if it was going to save.
So melodramatic.
Yeah, I know. It's another sort of control, I suppose.
Somehow,
I think people want control.
I hope your wish is not realised.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Definitely.
I wonder, too, whether there is a useful parallel between the way we've managed to integrate sex education into schools and talk more openly about sex, and that wonderful woman Molly Carlisle, who calls herself a death talker, I think, has written about how she would like to see death education integrated into life, the way we've managed sex education. And as someone who long ago in her career as a teacher got into a bit of trouble in the classroom, is that what you would like to see? Would you like to see death education being part of our kind of our life skills?
Look, I don't know about that. I don't know. I was talking at lunchtime with one of the people here today, and we were talking about how at times when we go through these situations of being with someone who's dying or caring for someone in a really exhausting and emotionally draining way, not just draining but an emotionally sort of enthralling way, then they die. And for a while after that, you go around the world with one skin less, and you're terrifically sensitive to everything, and you feel quite exalted in lots of ways. You feel as if some thick carapace that's between you and eternity has been scraped away or sort of exploded off you for a while. But you can't live like that. We can't live like that because we have to go to the supermarket and clean the house and work and do all those things. And so gradually that carapace grows back over. But it does seem to me that the things that you need, that there needs to be a structure. We need to construct something that when our carapace does get torn off in a terrifying way by approaching death, that there are people there who we can call on or who can step towards us. But I don't think that any day will ever dawn where everybody is cool about death. It's not going to happen because it's the hugest, most kind of psychic terror that a human being can know is the fact that one day one isn't going to be here. I'm going to die. There won't be a Helen. What? How outrageous! But doesn't everyone feel that? I remember one time somebody saying to me once, someone telling me about her mother who had advanced cancer. This is a long time ago, way back in the 70s. And she said, she won't go to hospital. She's terribly ill, but she won't go to hospital. And I said, thinking to myself, oh, I would be more sensible than that. I said, why won't she go to hospital? And my friend said, well, because I think that would, to her, that would mean that she was going to die. And at the moment when she said that, it was the first moment in my life that I'd ever felt the ground just drop away from under my feet. And just for a split second, I was hanging there in this horrible chasm with wind and darkness. And I suddenly knew just for that long, and it was over in a split second, I thought, I'm going to die. One day, it's over for me. And I've never quite forgotten that, although, I intellectually remember it. I don't remember it as an experience. It doesn't, every time I think of it, the ground doesn't drop away. But you only need to have felt that once to know that it's a possible feeling that a human being has in the face of extinction, the idea of extinction. So I don't think it's ever going to be that we'll have that harmonious sense in all of us that death is part of life and that it just flows. Very occasionally, it might be that circumstances conspire in some way that you experience that flowing, and somebody can die peacefully or even gladly give up their life because they've had enough and they're ready to go. But people fight not to die, and people don't want to die. It's pretty good here. There's the sky and there's a leaf. And you don't need much to be glad to be alive. And so, on a day like this, when you walk out and the sun's shining and the air's soft and there's a little breeze, you think, Jesus, what a wonderful planet we live on, even though we've murdered it and everything. But there's still those. But to be alive is a very simple demand when you think about it. So the person who's lying there not wanting to die isn't thinking, I've got to have a PhD or a JAG. They're just thinking, I just want to be able to keep on looking out that window just for a little bit longer. And
Can I just make a comment on the question?
Very briefly, because I know that...
That's okay, sorry. I was just going to observe that children quite often accept death as a very natural part of life. My grandson was 8 when my husband died. My husband died in my arms. My grandson was there, and he came up and gave us all a big kiss. They accept it. It isn't unnatural to them. They're far more aware than we give them credit for.
Okay, it's your turn. So, Jan, we've got a few moments for question. We are running a little bit late, but I think it's worth running a little bit late when you have these kinds of insights available. So, if you've got a question, raise your hand and Jan will come and find you.
I found myself agreeing very much with what Helen said about how we're likely to feel about death. But what bothers me is that in our society, death has become so medicalised to the extent that it almost seems unfair that they couldn't fix it, and it did happen in the end. And I think that's become a form of illiteracy about death, because, I mean, only a generation or two ago, people knew people who died and were dying around them. But I was struck by the fact that my mother was dying. She had friends in their 80s and 90s who had no concept of the terminal illness. They were told she couldn't sit up, she couldn't eat. And they said, well, why not? Can't they fix it? And these were people who were probably only a year or two away from this themselves. And I thought, they're not mentally prepared, they're not aware. And this has happened so quickly in our society. So I agree that you probably can't teach children about death, but there's something missing. There's a dysfunction, there's a gap between reality and what people are thinking, more and more, I'm feeling. Anybody comment on that?
I have an answer for that one. Hello? I have an answer for that, and I actually blame the media. Every day you open the newspaper and they tell you that there's a cure for this and a cure for that and a cure for that. You read about cryogenics and the fact that they're going to be able to keep people alive forever. They have institutes for longevity around the world. They talk about, I'm sorry if I'm upsetting some people in this room, they talk about a cure for cancer. But you know, that's like saying there's a cure for life. For death. You know, as long as we keep putting that out there, nobody's going to accept the reality of it all. And everybody's grasping, as I said earlier in a discussion, medicine's been the blessing and the curse. You know, we expect them to keep us alive forever.
I just wanted to add something for people, because a lot of people here will have had friends or family who have died alone. And much of that conversation was about the comfort of friends and family being there. But my experience also is that some people are on a spiritual journey. So the journey of dying is about the external journey of the body and also about the inner journey of the spirit. And we haven't discussed that much today, and that's fine. But, you know, a lot of us will have experienced people dying with grace and moving into that beautiful, clear space, very similar to what you're speaking about, the near-death experience of the tunnel of light, of bliss, of whatever. And that, so I'd just like to drop people back to that, as opposed to a chasm of fear, of the awareness, of the thought of it, and possibly the near-death reality, that's where they're going, that they may be, I don't know the answer, but they may be on that tunnel of light, and that is quite a blissful experience for most people that report that back. So if people die alone, I just invite people to drop to that thought rather than, oh my God, I wasn't there was nobody to hold their hand, that their experience on an inner journey may have been okay for them.
Please join me in thanking Helen, Joel and Kathy.